One. Well, hello and welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is Amanda Dubois. We're going to be talking to her about herself and her new book, Unshackled, a Camille Delaney mystery. Hey, Camille.
That was a
Um,
slip.
yeah, that's a Freudian slip there. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay,
Super fun to be
fantastic.
here.
Oh, my pleasure. I can't wait to talk about this book. It's about a mystery. It's a thriller. It's got social issues, and it's jam-packed with stuff. But before we get to any of that, as viewers and listeners are familiar, we'd like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Or were we kind of like, I don't ever need to see that again? I'll go first just to give Amanda time to collect her thoughts. Since the recordings of these are a little more spaced out, excuse me, had a little more time to catch up on a few things. So my wife and I went to go see Sunset Boulevard at our local art house cinema. I've seen it so many times before, but to see it on the big screen, it was
Oh,
fantastic. And I'm totally blanking on the woman who plays Norma Desmond, but she is mesmerizing, and I just loved it. And then for Valentine's Day, which was last week, went to see a movie I hadn't seen before, but my wife had, was Pretty in Pink, the John Hughes classic from 1986. And boy, was that a movie from the 80s. Oh my goodness, I could not get over that. And so glad we see it. Glad we saw it. I don't need to ever see it again. And it's playing here in San Francisco, is one of my favorite movies. It's a show based on, it's Back to the Future, the musical. Incredibly silly. If you love the movie, you'll like the show. If you're not crazy about the movie, maybe you shouldn't see the show. But they changed a lot of things to make it more stage friendly. But it's still an enjoyable theater experience. And if you like the movie, you'll probably have a good time with that. So that's what I have been catching up on. But Amanda, what about you?
well, I'm deep in The Americans, that streaming TV series. It's like in
Sure.
season 157. I don't know. I'm just going through the whole thing, but I'm having a blast watching that. It's just the story is so upside down and twisted and fun to watch. So I've been watching that, and then I'm thinking about trying to turn this book into a movie. So I've been sort of assigned to watch a bunch of legal thrillers. So I'm back to
Oh,
Aaron
wow.
Brockovich. I watched The Firm, the old John Grisham movie. So I don't have anything current to talk about, but the old classics live long. So
Nope.
that's what I'm
Well,
into.
that's what makes them classics.
Right.
Okay, so as Amanda did refer to, we're going to be talking about her book Unshackled, a Camille Delaney mystery, and I'm going to read the bio that's on the back cover. Amanda Dubois started her career as a registered nurse before becoming a lawyer. She has practiced in the areas of medical malpractice and divorce and family law. She founded Civil Survival Project, an organization that teaches advocacy skills to formerly incarcerated individuals. She is the managing partner of the Dubois Levias Law Group in Seattle. Okay, so Amanda, let's start a little bit talking about you. I mean, how did you get your start? I mean, it talks about that you were a nurse, but even when you were a kid, were you like a big reader or a big writer, or was it just like, I'm going to be in the medical field?
Oh, well, I always wanted to be in the medical field, but when I think about sometimes when we think about how we got to where we are and what we like to do, I was several years ago, I was thinking about when I was a kid, I loved to play dolls.
Okay.
And that's kind of a logical thing to becoming a writer because when you're playing dolls, you have all the characters and you're moving them around putting them in the outfits you want them to be in, and they get in the car and they drive places and they have adventures. So I was, like sometimes you read these books and it says, think about what in your past, created to where you are now. And I thought that kind of made some sense to me. So anyway, I think that's sort of one way that led me to want to write because I like to create worlds, which is what you do when you're playing dolls. You might not know that because maybe you didn't play dolls, but I always wanted to be in the medical business. And so when I was, in college, way back in undergraduate school, I thought I'd go to medical school and then I decided to go to nursing school. So I was a nurse for about 5 years before I went to law school.
I was going to say, what was the impetus that said, okay, I'm a nurse, but actually I want to go into law?
Okay, this is a dumb story, but I
Okay.
I was a nurse and I wanted to have a job with more autonomy. So I thought the logical thing would be to go to medical school. So I went back to school while I was working full time as a nurse, and I took all those really hard science classes, biochemistry, organic chemistry, physics, all that. And then I realized I kind of didn't like it. So then I thought, well, now what am I going to do? So I thought maybe I should get an MBA because why not? So one day I went to the university bookstore here in Seattle and I went to get the book. You have to take a graduate school test. And so there's one test for MBA school, there's one test for GRE school, which would be like going to graduate school in nursing. And then right next to that, and there was the MCAT book, which medical school, and I'd already written that off. But the next to that was the law school book. And I thought, God, I've never even thought, I didn't even know a lawyer. So I'm like, maybe I should get that book too. Literally, that's how it happened. So I went home, it was a sunny day. I was sitting on my deck. I had got out the GMAT book, which is the business school book. It was all this math and calculus, and it was boring and awful. And I thought, this is not going to work. So I went and got a beer and went back out on the deck and started the law school book. And I was whizzing through it. It's all these analytical reasoning. And my husband, who was my boyfriend, then came home from work. And I said, I think I'm going to go to law school. And he's like, why the hell would you want to go to law school? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm studying these books and I'm not good at this one. I'm good at this one. And maybe that's a message. That's literally how I ended up in law school. So I was a
Wow.
stranger in a strange land when I went to law school. I knew nothing about law.
Well, I guess would you call it fortuitous that the law school book was like next to the medical books at the university bookstore as opposed to like, be a geologist. Yeah.
Well, they were the graduate school
Okay.
study book section. So that I still remember they're all on the bottom shelf there and they're all laid out. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just try this one. So I had no idea what being a lawyer was all about. Not a
Okay.
clue.
Okay, so now you are a practicing attorney.
I am.
But this leads into what the show is all about. How did the writing come about, or were you just kind of writing on the side, like whole time, like even during nursing school and practicing nurse, or was it after you became an attorney, just like, oh, I suddenly need a creative outlet?
Well, it's coming from the world of nursing. It's sort of this a lot. It's coming from the world of nursing where you're sort of in this world where people like you and everybody's helpful and patients are all important and doesn't matter who they are or where they came from. When they come into the hospital, they're just as person in 207 is just as in person in room 208. You know what I mean? So, but then it got into the law and I was a medical malpractice lawyer. And I quickly learned that in the medical malpractice world, in the legal world, your value as a person is related to how much money you can make. And so if you're a dentist and you get in a car accident and you break your hand, it's worth a lot more than if you're a teacher or a mom who breaks their hand. And it made me crazy. And I was representing people who had been injured in medical incidents, and the insurance companies were so awful. I mean, they were so mean and they were so brutal, and they were really aggressive about trying to devalue people's lives, and it really pissed me off. And because I didn't come up through the legal world, like I wasn't a poli-sci major or any of that stuff, I was like, what the hell is going on here? And so um, I decided that I wanted to write about it, about how messed up insurance companies are and how it screwed up our system is when we value people's lives based on their economic circumstances, not on their value as a person. So I thought about, oh, I'll write an article for a magazine or I'll, write some for Reader's Digest. And I thought nobody really wants to hear your opinion on the value of human lives. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a mystery and it'll be about the value of human life, and which is the first two books are. They're about people getting medical malpractice incidents. And then Camille Delaney, who's the protagonist, is fighting against the insurance companies to try to prove that like this older guy has value as a person and this baby has value as a person. So I started writing because I was pissed off and I wanted to sort of teach people about the inequities in the legal system.
Okay, that raises a great point because I know on the back of the book it says Camille Delaney returns with another investigation, and this time it's personal. So that made me think, okay, there are other Camille Delaney mysteries. So are they of a similar vein to Unshackled, which we will get to shortly? So are the other books, are those influenced by, or do those also kind of revolve around Camille investigating a case, but that is also very tied into some kind of social issue, like you were talking about medical malpractice?
Yes. So the social issue in the first of all, I wrote the first two Camille Delaney books 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago, when I was a medical malpractice lawyer. Wrote them, got an agent in New York, never got them published, put them on the shelf. COVID happened. We have a cabin up in the San Juan Islands, which is very remote. And I thought, what am I going to do for a year up here? So I pulled those novels out, and I had a friend who owned a publishing company, and she said, I'll publish your book. So then I had to update them. But when I wrote them, I was deep like I was on the legislative committee of the trial lawyers. I was the board of governor of the trial lawyers. I was the chair of the medical malpractice section of the trial lawyers. I was like all up in this, human rights of people who have been injured by under medical mistakes. And so that was, to me, that was a social issue that I really wanted to tell people about because it's about the legal system. It's about how the legal system doesn't work for the little guy. And that's not fair. And insurance companies are taking advantage of people in the legal system. Fast forward 20 years later, now I've been a malpractice lawyer, then I've been a family law lawyer. I end up in getting to know a whole bunch of people who have been in prison, which is probably we'll talk about in a little bit. And now I'm pissed off about the way that mothers are treated in the prison system. And so the third book came out of another thing that I saw as this huge inequity in how our legal system, which is how we separate mothers from their children and don't do much to reunite them.
Yeah, I was going to say you do go into a lot of depth and a lot of lengthy discussions throughout the course of the story of Unshackled about people dealing with this kind of scenario and also the ramifications it has on the families and also on the kids and also just on the impact it has on society in general. And also it's like people coming up with their attempt to rectify it or try to fix it somehow. So I guess that leads to the question. So like, if you could give us like the elevator pitch for Unshackled, and also maybe go into a little more in depth about like what was the inspiration for just the coming up with the story. I mean, did you have clients that were going through this kind of thing, or was it just that you'd read about it and you said, okay, that's a great idea for a story, and I can tie something around that. I mean, please, like go talk about the book. Like how did it get started?
Well, about 8 or 9 years ago, I had written a series of books that was sort of like Law for Dummies. It was books about like how to be a good employee and um, how to rent an apartment and simple things like that. And I ended up, so I was teaching them sort of as a pro bono type, lawyer thing. And I ended up fortuitously teaching it to a group of people who had been in prison. And I'm a privileged white lady. I do divorces for really rich people. I'm not a criminal lawyer. As far as I know, I don't really know any, people who have been in prison. Well, now I do, but at that point I didn't. And so I'm teaching all this stuff to this group of people that had recently come out of prison. And this one guy raised his hand. He says, this is all really interesting. And thank you so much. And this is so helpful. And, this is going to be so helpful to us, but there's just one problem. And I said, well, what's that? And he goes, we're all felons and we can't get a job and we can't get an apartment. And I was dumbfounded, like I knew nothing about this. And then they started teaching me and we became friends. And I realized quickly that that there was a whole bunch of laws that had been set up with all kind of good intentions, but they were holding people back when they got out of prison. So now I'm starting to make a lot of friends with people who have been in prison, and they're telling me like the scariest night of my life was the night that I came out of prison because I had nowhere to go and I had no money and I didn't know, and I couldn't stay with my grandma because she's in public housing and I couldn't go into the public housing unit because I have a felony and all this, all these barriers that make it impossible for these folks to, get their lives back on track. And so I decided to put together a workshop to teach people who had been in prison how to talk to legislators so that they could start changing the laws so that they wouldn't be having all these problems when they got out. And one thing led to it. So my first workshop was, I don't know, 2017 or something. And we had 75 formerly incarcerated people came to this workshop and we taught them about human rights, and we talked about how a bill becomes a law, and we talked about organizing, we talked about women's suffrage and civil rights and marriage equality and how people can organize. Well, what I learned along the way is something like 1 in 4 people in the United States has a criminal record that impacts their ability to get jobs and housing, which is close to 100 million people. So I'm thinking, this is a large group of people. And if the people who are politicians and elected officials understood the problems that these folks are having, they have, they're voters and they need to listen to their voters. So one thing led to another. And pretty soon I've got this whole organization called Civil Survival, which is we're doing workshops all over the state. We're going down to legislature. We're talking to state legislators. My hypothesis was that if the legislators would build relationships with my people who had all been in prison and like really open their heart and hear their problems, they would care about them. And lo and behold, it really worked. So now, before you knew it, civil survival is changing laws. they're friends with their senators, they're friends with their mayor, they're on speed dial with their state representative, and it turns into this little bit of a love fest between the people that had been elected and my friends who had all been in prison. So what my experience was, it wasn't clients or anything, was these were my friends. And I just started hearing their stories, and they're still my friends. Like I've got tons of friends who've served time in prison who are all doing, some of them are professors now, and some of them are lawyers, and some of them are doing work, social services type work. Some of them are, one of them is works in the legislature as a policy analyst, and some of them are, still just getting started and coming out and, driving Uber and things like that. But anyway, I have a whole bunch of friends. And the one thing when we would, in our civil survival workshops, we would have our people get together and tell their stories to the legislators. We teach them how to like lobby, like you have to talk to a legislator. We'd have legislators come into the workshop and they would listen to the stories and give my people tips on how to put their, do an elevator pitch to the legislator, like, right? So, anyway, so the stories that really, hit me the hardest were the moms
Hmm.
because they were not set up for success when they came out of prison. And then a lot of my girlfriends are moms who have served time in prison, and their stories were very similar in terms of, there was no help for them to get reunited with their children. There was no support for them to maintain relationships with their children when they were in prison, which is what the book's all about, as you know.
Hmm.
So the story came from me wanting to tell the story of these moms in prison.
Okay, it's a fascinating story, and it's really gripping. I mean, it's not just the social aspect of it, but also the mystery and thriller part. That it. I guess that was another one of the questions was that kind of like focusing on the writing aspect of the story. We'll get back to the social part as well. Did you have a strong sense of how it was all going to play out when you started? Like you knew how it was going to end, or was it kind of like do you outline or you have pantser? Or do you just kind of like had a few like these are things I want to make sure I include?
Well, all three, there's three of these books, and all three of them, I start off with a story idea, but then it just kind of takes it on a life. It's almost like watching a movie. It's
Hmm.
like, I don't necessarily know exactly I don't want to say what the ending is, but I didn't see that
Sure.
ending necessarily coming.
Hmm.
And there are
So you
characters that
didn't start knowing what the ending was going to be.
I mean, I knew kind of where I was going, but not like some of the twists and turns that happen.
Sure, sure.
And some of the character development, some of the characters that start off as bad guys and they're not as bad as you think. And,
Hmm.
I didn't know any of that stuff. And then that's the hard part about writing, honestly. So you're writing along and it's like, oh my God, this woman isn't such a horrible person. Or, oh, here's where we're going to find this thing. Or, this is the missing piece of the puzzle. But then you got to go back and set it up. Because once you get there, then the writing process is like, well, you can't just pop up here and, page 254 with the missing emerald or something, you got to then go back at the beginning and say, you got to put the clues in and stuff like that. Because now when I find out where the story's going, so it's really, it's like the writing along is super fun. And then this whole detail thing gets a little tedious, but it's really important, obviously.
Yeah,
So.
I did want to ask you, I mean, since it is a mystery thriller, was it tough to develop the progression of the story? You know, here's a problem, and then there's the characters to find clues, and eventually that leads to that leads to something else. Did you have to did you have a big chart, or did you just kind of shaking your head no?
Wish I could be that organized. When I wrote the first book I did, I had because I took, I read about how to write a book and they said, oh, you need file cards all over your walls and stuff.
Oh
And I did
boy.
that. But when I did the third one, I probably should have done that because that was a little bit easier.
Hmm.
But, I work full time as a lawyer. Like I have a full litigation practice and I run a law firm at the same time. And I've got a bunch of employees. And so I don't have the luxury of sitting around all day, with posters, flashcards on my walls. I
Of course.
mostly write on the weekends and stuff. So I kept to I get my head into it. I read the last couple chapters I write, which sometimes I don't even hardly remember what I wrote.
Mm.
It's kind of weird. And then I'm like, oh, this is good. And then off we go. And then we go like three chapters ahead, and then we go back a couple, and then we go. And then when we come to a pivot point where it's like, which it is for me too, it's like, wait, what? And it's like, oh, if that's the case, then we got to go back and, set it all up somehow. So it's like to me almost watching a movie.
Okay, so sometimes you're even surprising yourself when you
Oh
read
yeah,
something that you wrote maybe like what the week before or 2 weeks ago, and like, I don't remember this, but wow, that's really good. I have to
good. Or there's a glitch here. Wait a minute, this doesn't go together exactly so good. So yeah.
actually, that I have asked that of a lot of writers before. That were you writing and suddenly just something wasn't working, and then you had to go back and try to figure out where did the problem start. And but
Yes.
then if you take that out, that has the domino effect on the rest of that story and all of the stories connected to it. Did you experience that while you were putting this, I guess, this book and all of your other books together?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a house of cards, right? Like when
Hmm.
you realize there's something amiss, or for me, it's more like it's something cool that's happening, but sometimes it's something that's amiss. And then you do have to kind of go back, and then you got to try to figure out where in the story that you can weave that back in or unweave it out and change it or something. So yeah, I think it's a loop, like it's a four, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then 100 steps back, and then work your way back forward. It's a kind of a flow.
Okay. And since it is a mystery, did you ever have like maybe a plot development and then you realize, oh, this, they didn't find the clue that they needed to, or I don't like the way they found this, and you have to go back and come up with another way to do it, but you get the same results.
Yeah, I like to swim. So I live here in Baja and I have the swimming pool and it's really blue and it's kind of sparkly on the bottom. And when I get stuck, sometimes I'll go swimming and then I'll be like in this blue, it's really kind of stunning. It's really pretty. And I'll be like in this blue swimming pool and I'll just start thinking, okay, now how would that be? How would that be? Why would he do? It's the why. It's usually the
Oh,
why. Like I
the
know what's
motive.
going to happen, but I'm like, why would he do that? I want this guy to end up over here for some reason, but you got to figure out why they're over there. So I'll go and I'll just be thinking why, and then I'll come up with all these different possibilities. Like maybe he did it because of this. Maybe because his mother was mean to him when he was a kid. Maybe it was because he always wanted to be a clown in the parade, or like I don't know. But you have to me every character kind of has to have a why. And even if you don't talk about it in the book, you kind of have to know what their why is because that sort of propels their actions.
Have you ever had a reader come back to you, maybe like a beta reader, come back and say, "Okay, I don't understand why they're doing this," or they wouldn't. This doesn't seem like something they would do. Like they point out a problem that's more story based, not necessarily character based, but it's more about the story or the plot. And then does that force you to go back and try to like, okay, I have to try to totally fix it, but I have to kind of like, do a little cosmetic surgery on it, make it a little bit stronger so it works better within the whole context of the story.
Yeah, that's usually so. When you probably know this, but when you write a book, then you have a publisher and you have what's called a developmental editor, and that's the person who does that. They'll go through the book and they'll say things like, you don't even need this character. Or like, really, he's
Hmm.
not, you could have the stuff this character's doing could also be done by this other person. You get rid of him and that'll tighten it up. Or, why would that guy have gotten in a car and, drove over there? Like, that doesn't make any sense because he was over here having a hamburger and now all of a sudden you've got him chasing somebody down the beach. Like, that doesn't match. Um, so that's the developmental editor. And so for me, I have a really good development editor. And she's the one who will sort of push me on that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I mean, my thing is more screenwriting, but if there's something in your story that doesn't make sense or it doesn't seem to fit within the whole flow of the story or the context of the story, readers will call you out on it and say, "Okay, why is the character doing this?" And you have to have a reason why. You can't just say, "Well, because because I need it." That's it. The story falls apart if they don't do that.
Well, my favorite reader call out, and I never went on there because I couldn't figure out how to do it, but on Goodreads, which wasn't like this, but it was funny to me. I have this one scene in the first book, The Complication, and it's a scene of a holiday party. And I was writing it, and I decided to name all of the characters in it from my mother's bridge club. So it's like Molly and Midge and like all these people. And then I'm on this Goodreads, and this one would say, "This is such a good book," but there's a scene where she pulls these names out of the 60s and it just stops the flow of the whole book. How's the Bridge Club?
Wow, that's funny. Actually, I did want to ask you about the characters. That it is a big cast in this story.
Yes, it is.
It got a little tricky for me at times to kind of keep track. Okay, who is this person again? And kind of like I not that I would stop it. I have to pause it. Okay, okay, this this is Gigi and this is Clarice. Okay, and this is the daughter. Okay, is this the other daughter? We never really see much. So was it tough for you as the writer to keep track of all of these characters and all of their various subplots? And I know that's a challenge to to not only lay them out, but also to interweave them so that something that this one minor character does has an impact on a major character, but that also has a ripple effect on the characters around that major character.
Right. Well, for me, it's not super hard because any of these characters, I've been living with them for a long time because they're all the same people, and I like to pull people in
Sure.
from, like, I love it to, like, if you read the other two books, you'll see some of these people pop up over here. And so I like to be able to snatch back into the comp. So I feel like these are like my friends now. So it's probably harder for a reader to follow it than for me because I'm like, I've got my core group of people that have followed through three different books. And then there's the new, like Charlie is new, obviously, but Gigi's been in there since book one. And so
Hmm.
you follow these people along. So I feel like I know them pretty well. Although I have to still have this page in a notebook someplace that says
Oh, of
kind of how old
course.
people are. And it's not writing a series. I didn't realize that, but like you can't screw it up. If somebody was grew up in, Massachusetts in book one, you can't say, oh, I'm going home to Florida or something. Like
Uh-huh.
keep it all straight. So that's that's the
I
challenge.
was going to say, is that something your developmental editor would have pointed out, or they would have recognized, or is that or have readers gotten back to you about that?
No, readers haven't because after you go through the developmental editor, first of all, when you write a book, they give you this thing called a style sheet, which was all new to me, but it's got every single character, it's got every single place, it's got every single description. And this is something that's the next batch of editors, the copy editors. They do so the developmental editor helps you with the story, but then there's these people that have a love-hate relationship with because like a lot of my books, there's a lot of sailing scenes because I'm a big
Hmm.
sailor and I live in the San Juan Islands. And so um, there's scenes there, and then they'll go on the chart and they'll say, well, you said this was Cattle Pass over here, and now you're saying it's Cattle Point. And we went on the chart and we think it's Cattle, and this is Lopez Sound. And they go right down to all of the details. And your character came into the scene and took off threw her leather jacket on the chair. And then the scene happened and she grabbed her red sweater and went and jumped in her car and did, what is it, the leather jacket or the red? Like they go through
Wow.
they pick apart everything. So those are the people that tell you if you've got, and they go through it like three or four times. I
Oh,
mean, it's
wow.
insane to the point where you're like, just fix it. And they're like, no, you have to decide. I'm like,
Just
I don't know. It's a jacket or a sweater. I don't care.
because, well, you're the writer and you can't get away with, well, because I said so.
I know. Well, they're
That's why.
always right. I mean, they
Oh,
go
yeah.
through and I think for people like my books are really very factually accurate because I was a nurse and I am a lawyer and I know I've been in court a million times. I know how to try a case. Those courtroom scenes are really poignant for me because ever since COVID, like we've gone on to Zoom trials and stuff. So when I'm
Hmm.
writing these courtroom scenes, I'm like, oh, we're back in the courtroom and the crappy old hangars and the weird, checkerboard floors and the smell of it and the popcorn, the creepy old popcorn from the elevator lobby and stuff that wafts through. So like, some of it is really real for me. So I don't have a problem with that stuff, but they get down into the nitty gritty of the just things, characters, somebody has a ponytail, but then you say something about, they have a hat on and they're saying, well, where's the ponytail? Did the ponytail go under the hat? It's like, oh my God, you guys. So
They're just trying to keep you honest. That's all. Actually, that is something. You also referred to this as well. That the story takes place in the Seattle area, and you mentioned the San Juan Islands. So it's really not just a setting for the story. It's almost like a character because it's so involved. You have a lot of mentions about stuff in the downtown area. I'm not as familiar with the Seattle area, so bear with me. But you talk about things in the downtown. I know they reference like, oh, we picked up some fish at the Pike Market or
right,
Pike.
yep. Pike Place
eh,
Market.
Pike Place Market, and I'm talking about this is how long it's going to take us to get from this island to that island, that sort of thing. So did did you use that because you're familiar with the area? I mean, just and also because that's where I live, so this is what I know. So it made it easier to, I guess, assemble the story and some of the details.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I write what I know. And I
Sure.
know I've lived Seattle almost all my life, and it's a cool city, and there's a lot of cool things about it. And so it lends itself to becoming a book character, right? And then there's all the little, like Port Townsend is a cool place, and Port Angeles is a cool place, and the San Juan Islands are like second to none. Like there's so many cool places. And then in the first book, there's scenes with a lot of scenes with float planes. And so it's a very, but that's, people who live in Seattle who read the book, it's like, oh my God, this is just like being downtown, or this is like being at Friday Harbor. I have a cabin in Friday Harbor and you've got it exactly right. I'm like, yeah, because I've been there a million times. So, and lawyers who read it, will say, oh my God, those courtroom scenes are so real. And the nurses who read it will say, of course, it's very, like those places are character like, I think, because like I would never try to write a book about like going to Antarctica, or like I'm not
Mhm.
a good researcher. So I'm not the one who's going to go research about, something in London or something. Like I'm going to write what I know about because it's, makes sense to me and it's easy and that makes it real.
Okay. One of the things you kind of referred to this a little bit earlier that I wanted to talk about, that after the story, at the end of the book, there are a lot of acknowledgments of people who helped you out. I think the first one you reference is a lot of the women who were or may still be incarcerated, that it kind of made me wonder, was there a particular group that had like the biggest impact on the book? I mean, you got feedback from somebody, like you have like someone who was a retired Seattle police officer or police detective, and she had a lot of great input. But was there a particular group? I mean, was it the incarcerated women who like had the biggest impact on how the story played out? And not just about the details, but also about you go into talking about the emotional impact and how it affects their families, and going to all this detail and all this background information that really adds a lot of dimension to the whole story.
Well, yeah, because they're my friends. And so I don't, that is can sometimes when I do interviews and stuff, people are like, you must have done a lot of research. I'm like, no, I just have girlfriends and we have coffee together and they tell me, not because I'm writing a book, just because they're my friends and, we talk about stuff. And so, um, there was one woman at one of our early civil survival workshops who talked about coming out of prison, and she had a 2-year old and all these, she tried to, there's a scene in the book where, she tries to go to the food bank, but she can't get to a probation officer and she has to take a bus over there, but the bus is late and they won't let her take her kid. Like I've heard that story from 20 women.
Hmm.
It's an ongoing. So to me, I kind of feel, this sounds a little bit woo-woo, but I kind of feel like they were telling their story through me. I almost was channeling
Mm.
this vibe. Not every story is exactly factually the same, but the experience for most of my girlfriends that were in prison while they were moms will have some variation on the same story about how incredibly hard it was and how the system is not set up for them to maintain that relationship with their children, and how hard it is to get reunited with their kids when they get out because there's so many expectations and burdens, and you got to go here and you got to do that and you got to be in compliance with this rule and that rule, and being a mother doesn't really, it's not prioritized right now by the DOC when they get out. And so um, it was all of those stories. I just felt an obligation to make sure that I got it right. So I had a lot of girlfriends that read the book who've been in prison, who were, and, they would help me, and they would help me. The first scene, I was a little bit nervous because the first scene is about a Black woman who's in labor. And I thought, there's a whole thing like if you're a white woman, you shouldn't write about a Black woman's experience. I have a
Hmm.
really good friend who's a Black woman who was in shackles, who was shackled in labor. So there's a lot of input from a lot of mothers who did time in prison who, like right down to the uniforms. Like I had them in brown uniforms and they're like, nope, they wear blue uniforms. And then it was like she would go through 3 gates to get in. And I've been in the women's prison several times, but I don't count the number of gates you go through. And they'd be like, no, there's only 2 gates over there. And then there's a desk. When you go into the like the where the classrooms are, there's a desk at the front there, and the person who's at the desk a little bit higher. Like they were really, really, the details were very important to them. So they read through it a lot and just got all of those little details, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is that I imagined a lot of the women who experienced this, or they know someone who did, they were able to give you all this great, detail and information about it, just that it really adds to I can't say the realism of the book, because it's for the most part a very realistic kind of story. But after they read the final result, the book, did a lot of them say, this is exactly what it's like, and this is, I know this has happened to so many of my friends, type of thing?
Well, I don't know if you have a copy of the arc or of the final book, but in the front of the final book, there's a lot of quotes from a lot of
I
women.
believe, yeah, it's yeah, three pages of quotes, and there's a
Yeah, and a
formerly
lot of those are
incarcerated
women that,
mom,
yeah.
a lot of formerly, and here's one, currently incarcerated mom too.
Yeah, she was, I had a friend who was doing a program inside the prison, and so she took the manuscript in like in paper form and there was two or three or four women in there who read it, and then they would send her notes on like notebook paper because there's no computers. Like they would write notebook paper to my friend who was doing a program in there, and she was also formerly incarcerated.
Hmm.
And so she would bring me out these notes written on handwriting on, on notebook paper that would say, and then they did that review from Kaylee Knudsen came to me on notebook paper. It was a handwritten, because I asked, would you do a review that I could, to tell people if this is, if you like the book and Kaylee wrote that on notebook paper.
Wow, that's great. So apart from women who have gone through this experience, how have the responses been for the book? I mean, have you heard from people like, oh, I want to talk to my local representative about this. I want to, we need, what can I do to help take action about it? I mean, what kind of responses have you received as the author?
Well, it just got published a few weeks ago, so
Okay.
reviews are still coming in, but I'm joyful that so many people see the social, like I'm afraid that I wanted to be careful not to like be too preachy,
Mm,
this whole, but I wanted the story to still be a story, but I wanted people to put the book down and say, well, that was a fun mystery, but wow, I didn't know any of that. And that's
sure.
exactly the feedback I'm getting. Like when, like the reviews that are coming, it's a great mystery and a page turner, and really you can't put it down except for, wow, I didn't really know
Hmm.
so my goal is that people will then think about what they can do. I mean, obviously, I didn't just write it so people would hear a story. It's like, well, what should we do? And I don't know necessarily what the answers are, but I know there's a lot of smart people out there that, should be thinking about this. So
Okay, and incidentally, we are talking to Amanda Dubois about her book Unshackled, the Camille Delaney mystery. Amanda, so what's next? I mean, is there another Camille Delaney mystery in the works, or do you already have it ready to go, and now your editors are
um,
tearing through it?
no, I'm struggling with what the next one's going to be. I've got like three different ideas. And so I'm kind of trying to figure that out. And then I'm sort of also thinking about this whole screenplay idea. And I'm kind of nervous to write a new book while the screenplay is still an idea because I'm afraid I'll get my head mixed up too much. So um, I'm sort of in a little bit in limbo, but I think I know what the next one is. And I don't think it's going to take forever to write, but
All right,
Camille's
that's
going to stay, I think, in the prison world for a while.
got it. Okay, so Amanda, so where can people find out more about you? I mean, a website, or are you on social media?
I have a website called amandadubois.com. I have, the same old Facebook, and I have a friend who makes me do TikToks. Actually, she does them for me. I shouldn't say that, but I have the TikTokers. I got Instagram, it's Amanda Dubois 206, which is my area code.
Ah,
I
yes.
have Facebook, Amanda Dubois author. I have LinkedIn. I got all the social media, but amandadubois.com is a good place to go because it talks about my lawyering, talks about social activism, different boards that I sit on, different types of work that I'm doing in the books. So
And that's where people can also order the books as well.
yeah. They can order it there. They can, it's also Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, or even would be really the coolest is go to your local bookstore and buy a real book from a real bookstore and support the local bookstores.
Here, here. That's what I say. So again, we've been talking today with Amanda Dubois about her book Unshackled, a Camille Delaney mystery. It's a very gripping mystery thriller with a lot of social elements, social issue elements. And if you love the Seattle area, you're going to really get a kick out of this one as well. If you don't like Seattle, you'll get a kick out of it as well. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today. This was a very, very informative conversation.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Oh, my pleasure. Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. My social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z. That's at maximumz.blog. I'm still on Twitter for the time being, at maximum_Z. The show's Twitter account is odd at podcast CWL. I'm on Blue Sky at Pez Screenwriting, and the show is at podcast CWL, also on Blue Sky. And on Instagram, I'm also at Pez Screenwriting, and feel free to check out my Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and tie two very wonderful things. Like I said, that's Amanda. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, go write something.